With Josh Allen likely to sit out Week 18, it looks like the MVP race is about to be over. The cement is set. We know who's going to win. We know the candidates. We know their arguments. As things stand now, Josh Allen is the favorite and who I expect to win. And it's been a very competitive race this year. Obviously, it came down to Lamar versus Josh Allen. I think Saquon Barkley could have a pretty compelling argument if the team he was on was not so overwhelmingly talented and giving him so much help. I think Derrick Henry could have a legitimate argument if you remove the other MVP candidate from his team. And I think both the top two guys have done a tremendous amount and are undeniably the two most valuable players for their respective offenses. But to me, this is Josh Allen's award. The Buffalo Bills are going to finish their season with no runner going for over 1,000 yards and no receiver going for over 1,000 yards. This offense is entirely Josh Allen. He is by far the most valuable player in the league. Without him, the Bills' offense is completely dysfunctional. He has been responsible for a higher percentage of his offense than Lamar was for the Ravens. He's accounted for more touchdowns over the Buffalo Bills than Lamar has for the Ravens. And people are going to say, oh, he's a tush-push merchant, the rushing touchdowns, yada, yada, yada. How do you think the Bills get downfield? How do you think they keep winding up on the 1 yard line? All due respect to James Cook, who has taken a phenomenal leap, it's not him. It's not Amari Cooper. It's not Dawson Knox. It's not Dalton Kincaid. It's not Khalil Shakir. It's not Keon Coleman. It's Josh Allen. He is elevating the talent around him. He is raising their floors, and he's got them situated to be a higher seed than Lamar, the number 2 seed in the AFC. He's the one man to beat Patrick Mahomes this year, and I think it's pretty clearly him. Now, we can talk more about Lamar in a second, but I want to hear your response to that comment.
Well, I don't know where you're getting that Josh Allen has accounted for more touchdowns. That's not true.
No, a higher percentage of his team's touchdowns.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up. I do think this is the most interesting MVP debate we've had in a while, with the running back performances we've had this year, with the two performances we've had from quarterbacks this year in Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And both of these quarterbacks, whether you're a Ravens fan, a Bills fan, a Josh Allen homer, a Lamar Jackson homer, both of them have arguments for the MVP award. Lamar Jackson is having statistically one of the best quarterback seasons in NFL history. He's going to add to that in the final week of the season. Josh Allen is having a great statistical season, and against the Rams in a loss this season, a loss against a playoff team, he had one of the best quarterback performances of all time. He beat the Lions, the number 1 seed. He handed the Chiefs their only loss. So from a wins perspective and showing up in big moments, he has the best resume this year from a quarterback perspective. I think the more interesting conversation surrounds what are maybe detractors for each of these quarterbacks, rather than hyping up and waxing on poetically about what each have accomplished this season.
That really is the beauty of it every year. It's not so much, oh, these guys all have great arguments like the college football playoff. It's about who's got the better arguments against their opponent.
I just want to start off with Josh Allen, since you talked about him the most. I think the biggest detractors on his season are the games where he put up absolute stinkers. Early in the year against the Ravens, really bad performance. They only scored 10 points. He threw for only 180 yards, with I think a lot of that coming on a 50-yard completion. Same thing goes the next week, where he's a big Keon Coleman play away from only throwing for 80 yards in that one. A couple weeks ago, he's in an absolute dogfight with the Patriots. So there are games this year where Josh Allen has not shown up, and then you look at maybe the statistical argument and where you would detract from him. He's not going to finish top 5 in the NFL in passing yards, passing touchdowns, passing completion percentage, a quarterback rating. He's not going to finish in the top 5 in any of those categories, where Lamar is in the top 5 in all of those categories. So I think those are the biggest things when you look to take away from Josh Allen.
Quick question, that second game you mentioned, you did not say the team, that was against the Miami Dolphins, right? That was the
Texans.
The Texans.
The stinkers are against the Texans, where they lost. The Texans.
Where they lost. Okay, he had a bad game
Ravens,
against the Dolphins.
And he had a really bad game, or not a bad game, but he didn't play a great game a couple weeks ago against the Patriots.
That was cold weather. If you were expecting a box score extravaganza, you are off your gourd. Josh Allen is certainly going to have worse stats at a glance than Lamar Jackson. Here's the difference. He is going to have played 100 fewer snaps. He is taking fourth quarters off. He is getting his team commanding leads and not staying in the game to stat pad. Part of that is because his defense is playing a little bit better, at least they were, than the Ravens, and part of that is he's not chasing those numbers to the extent Lamar is. As for his stinkers, yes, they weren't great. The loss to the Texans, very bad. The loss to the Ravens earlier in the year, very bad. I'll talk about that head-to-head matchup a little bit earlier in the year. but he was without his number one receiver. This was pre-Amari Cooper trade. A lot of these are excusable, and really the MVP race is what have you done for me lately? And lately, despite his performances, despite Lamar Jackson just stomping inferior competition, I do believe Josh Allen has been much better than him the second half of the season. Now, looking at that Ravens-Bills game, it is referenced frequently by Lamar Sports, say, oh, how can the MVP get stomped out by the other top MVP candidate, 35-10? A few things. One, the MVP of that game was not Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. It was Derrick Henry. Had one of his best performances, I think his best performance of the year, finished with just under 200 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. Dominant performance on the ground. He is what took the Ravens offense over the top, not Lamar that game. Secondly, the Ravens defense played by far their best game of the season. So the two leading factors in that head-to-head matchup, which was decisively won by the Ravens, were not Lamar Jackson. So that really doesn't move me one way or the other. But you're going to have worse stats when you play less snaps. You're going to have stinkers. Lamar himself has had a few stinkers throughout the course of the year. They have not been quite as bad, but Lamar has the fallback of handing the ball off to Derrick Henry to make his life a lot easier, which Josh Allen simply doesn't. If he's not clicking, the defense is entirely focused on him. There is no other help on that Bills offense who can bear the burden of an entire defensive system.
Well, we'll get to some of Lamar's stinkers in a little bit, but since we're on the topic of the supporting cast and what each of these players have had to work with this season, Josh Allen does not have anything close to what Derrick Henry has done for the Ravens this year. I think Derrick Henry is going to eclipse 1,900 yards because they still need to win next week, and in order to secure the AFC North, the Bills, they do not have a 1,000-yard rusher. And when you look at the health of each of these teams' key players, Mark Andrews, Derrick Henry, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, they have played in every single game this season. None of them have missed games due to injuries, and Isaiah Likely has only missed one game this year. When you take a look at some of the Bills' key players, Khalil Shakir has been banged up. Keon Coleman has missed games. Dalton Kincaid has missed games. I think James Cook even has missed a game or two. So there have been games this year where the Bills have been without some of their best players. A byproduct of that is Josh Allen not being able to produce up to the level he is fully capable of when he doesn't have his full talent on the field available to him, where Lamar Jackson has had that available to him the entirety of the season.
I also think it's supremely disingenuous from a lot of people to try and compare these two rosters and say, oh, well, the Bills are comparably talented to the Ravens. I would probably take Zay Flowers over any receiver Buffalo has right now. I take Mark Andrews over Kincaid and Dawson Knox. I take Likely over Knox as a tight end too. And Derrick Henry is in a different stratosphere than James Cook. James Cook has had a very good year, a couple of long touchdown runs. I think he's at 14, 15 touchdowns on the season. He is not in the same ballpark as Derrick Henry in terms of production. Lamar Jackson is clearly working with a fuller deck of cards than Josh Allen, and yet Josh Allen has outproduced him in some areas.
More continuity within their systems, because Zay Flowers, I certainly would take him over Khalil Shakir as just a pure talent, and he's been in the Ravens system longer than a guy like Keon Coleman, and they have Amari Cooper, who hasn't been super involved since they traded for him, but he also wasn't part of the team at the beginning of the season. So when you weigh that, it makes sense why Josh Allen, with key players being injured during the year and not being necessarily as talented as some of the Ravens guys, I think that edge of the argument certainly goes in his favor.
Let's also take a step back from just this year and look at what this award means in general, because let's be honest with ourselves, we as NFL fans know this is not an award consistently given out. It's not necessarily the most valuable player every year. It's certainly not the best player every year. Sometimes it's the player with the best stats. Sometimes it's the player with the best legacy. Sometimes it's just the most important player on their teams. Last year, this award was given out to Lamar Jackson because he was pretty clearly the most valuable player on the Ravens offense. Andrews was banged up. Zay Flowers was not producing anywhere close to the level he is at this year. They didn't have the established running game and Derrick Henry to go off of, and Lamar was carrying this offense to wins, and he had a bit more defensive help last season, but he was clearly the most valuable player. Dak Prescott absolutely lapped the field from Lamar in total yards and touchdowns. They were pretty close to each other in turnovers, yet Dak Prescott did not sniff that award because his team was worse, he won less games, and it was not as valuable to the Dallas Cowboys as Lamar Jackson was to the Baltimore Ravens. Now that's flipped around, a lot of Ravens fans are arguing purely based off stats. They're saying Lamar's got better numbers, he's going to finish with maybe 500 more yards, a few more touchdowns than Josh Allen. He deserves the MVP. Look at these numbers. That's just not the case. If you watch these games, this is not the best faith argument. I do not understand how your eye test, if you look at the Ravens and you look at the Bills, can say, oh yeah, Lamar Jackson is more valuable to what Baltimore is trying to do than Josh Allen is to what Buffalo is trying to do. Without Josh Allen, this team is winning 5 games. Without Lamar Jackson with an average quarterback in there, there's no argument this Ravens team still makes the playoffs with how dominant Derrick Henry's been. They got to adjust their style of play, certainly, but it's clearly a better team once you strip away the quarterbacks. Before you start laughing about the defense has been playing a lot better this past
I don't know, man. Mitchell Trubisky, 1 pass, 1 completion,
69 yards. Not 60 yards, 69 yards.
You put in a below average quarterback, clearly making things work over
so
there in Buffalo.
So you're saying if Mitch came in, they would average 70 yards a pass attempt and 1 touchdown every throw?
Maybe. You never know.
Guys, is it Joe Johnson or is it Tyler Huntley who's still their backup for the Ravens right now? Let's see what he looks like in Week 18. Send him out there.
Well, the Ravens still need to win, so Lamar Jackson will be out there. But I do think a piece of the argument that's been a little bit overblown the entirety of the season, with an element of truth to it, is Lamar Jackson not showing up in some games this year. I mean, against the Raiders, Gardner Minshew outplayed him. Jameis Winston outplayed him in the Browns loss. In the Steelers loss, I think he played good enough to win. He outplayed the quarterback on the opposite side of the field. However, he did not play all that great. He did not play to the elite level we expect of him, and they lost that game. Same thing goes for the Eagles game. A lot of his production came on the last drive of the game. I think he played good enough to win, and they would have if Justin Tucker isn't missing kicks all over the place, but he didn't play up to that elite level where they're just running away with the game and the game not being even close. So there's games where you can point to where he did not live up to the Lamar Jackson expectation we have of him, but I also think those games are a little bit overblown.
Yeah, they're kind of like Josh Allen's bad games earlier in the year where he just has the entire defense on. They get down early and they can't operate their offense to the full extent of its abilities. Bad games happen for every player, unless you're looking at Tom Brady in the Patriots' perfect season where he just laces the ball perfectly every single time. It felt like these games are going to happen over the course of a year, particularly when you're playing these high-level defenses when you've got the #1 strength of schedule for your respective divisions. It's hard, man, and you're going to have a stinker here or there against good teams. Finally, I want to touch on the running backs. I'm sure you're going to go on a little bit about Saquon Barkley. I want to look at Derrick Henry. He has clearly elevated this Ravens offense. They're averaging 50 more yards a game. They've gone from a very good rushing offense last year to one of the best rushing offense, if not the best rushing offense in NFL history. He is probably going to lead the league in rushing touchdowns. It is very conceivable he could crack 2,000 yards. If this was a less quarterback-centric award, he would certainly be a top 5 finisher in voting. I think it's going to be Lamar, Saquon, Allen, Baker Mayfield, and Sam Darnold as the 5 finishers. I'd probably slide him in there over Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold if we're being purely objective, ignoring positional value. He has had a fantastic season, and while it hurts Lamar a little bit, and that's not why I'm bringing this up, I do think he deserves a bit more credit for how dominant he has been.
I think an element of Lamar's success certainly can be attributed to Derrick Henry and vice versa. Some of Derrick Henry's success can be attributed to Lamar, and I don't think Derrick Henry really gets in the MVP conversation just because Lamar exists and there is a running back who is having a better year, as crazy good as Derrick Henry's year has been. When you take a look at Saquon's season, he may not play next week because they have the 2 seed locked up, but if the season ended today, the argument for him winning the MVP is quite simple. He'd be 8th all-time for a single season, averaging 5.9 yards a carry, and the guys in front of him, the only guys with more efficient seasons in their 2,000-yard campaigns, are Adrian Peterson's MVP campaign and Barry Sanders' 2,000-plus yard campaign. Only 2 guys have done it more efficiently. So I think that is an element to just how good Saquon has been this year. And when you take a look, some people may be pointing at he's only scored 13 touchdowns. He's 2nd in the league in rushing touchdowns, right behind Derrick Henry. 10 times he's been tackled on the 1-yard line. 11 times. 10 of those times have wound up in tush-push touchdowns. So if the tush-push doesn't exist and he doesn't have Jalen Hurts on his team, maybe let's just say half of those go to him, and then he's sitting at close to 20 rushing touchdowns on the season. When you take a look at the effect he's had on the Eagles offense actually has more rushing yards than the Ravens offense, which you called one of the best rushing offenses in NFL history. They have over 1,000 more rushing yards than they did last year. He's elevated their total yards per carry by over a whole yard. He has 1.3 yards more per carry than DeAndre Swift did behind this great Eagles offensive line last season. So he has brought this Eagles offense and this Eagles team to a completely new level.
A few of the points there. One, the tush-push stuff. It would be limited. I don't think he'd quite get to 20 because How many of those drives where it got tackled to the 1 yard line got extended because the Eagles picked up a first down on a 3rd and 1 or a 4th and 1 by doing a tush push? Probably a few. How many of those touchdowns would have gone his way when you've got A.J. Brown, a good passing attack, meaningful guys in the end zone, the tight end position to go catch balls for you? I don't know, maybe you get 3-4 more touchdowns if the tush push doesn't exist. But it does. It's kind of like saying, well, if kickoffs didn't exist, we wouldn't know who Devin Hester is. It's a part of the game.
Which is why I said about half. So I'd probably say around 3 to 5 under different circumstances maybe go his way, or instead of at 13 rushing touchdowns, he's sitting at somewhere from 16 to 18 rushing touchdowns, and his season on paper looks even crazier than it already is.
18 rushing touchdowns, I don't think would be leading the way. I think Henry either has 18 or 19 right now. But
he also has over 200 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, so I think
Henry's got 2 receiving touchdowns. He's either a 180 or 190 on receiving. Henry's been better on screen passes than most people give him credit for. Now, Saquon's been doing those wheel routes, did one in Brazil, has done a few later on the season, I think against the Commanders, where he just gets out of the backfield and goes streaking down the sideline. That's something Derrick Henry can't quite do, but I argue Derrick Henry, in some of his limitations in pass protection, is still better than Saquon at that. But we're getting into the nitty-gritty of things. I think an important part of that for me is why I don't quite value Saquon's season at the same level as those Barry Sanders and those Adrian Peterson's MVP years. One, his offensive line is clearly better. Adrian Peterson's run-blocking offensive line was above average maybe in 2012. Not that good. And he averaged 6 yards a carry. Barry Sanders, he had 2 all-pro guys on his offensive line. Aside from them, the rest of them were terrible. And they had absolutely no passing attack backing him up. There was no threat of anything else besides Adrian Peterson or Barry Sanders on those teams. Meanwhile, say what you want about Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. If they're still getting Saquon's touches, he's still getting the volume to break that number, and still not be able to crack that efficiency behind that good O-line, that tells me those MVP seasons from Sanders, from Pierce, maybe even from Eric Dickerson back in the day, are just much more valuable, a better expression of the greatness of the running back position. Saquon is very good. I'd probably put him 2nd or 3rd in MVP race, regardless of positional value, but I just think his numbers are a bit inflated due to his situation. Kind of like...
Well, he's been more efficient than the Eric Dickersons, the Chris Johnsons, and those guys that have reached that 2,000-yard mark.
Chris Johnson never sniffed the MVP, and Eric Dickerson, I think he was in a similar situation to Peterson. He just got a whole lot of volume.
Which it is kind of interesting.
I mean, I'm going to have to look up Eric Dickerson's situation after this year.
It is kind of interesting Chris Johnson didn't sniff it that year, considering he has the all-time scrimmage yards in a single season record.
Strange times, man. People just don't like the running backs.
Who do you think deserves to win the MVP? Will Josh Allen voters and Lamar Jackson voters cannibalize themselves, leading to a running back MVP? Let us know what you think down in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe, use code Thicc on Underdog, gets you bonus cash up to $1,000, and we'll see you in the next one.